You know, finding a decent watering hole in London that isn't some gimmicky wankfest, overpriced tourist trap for ditzy American students who think us Brits really do drink warm beer that tastes like unwashed feet, or an absolute dive where the mortality rate hovers somewhere around the death zone of Mount Everest, is a challenging prospect even for a seasoned drinker like me. So I was particularly pleased when I stumbled on a perfect little place on the South Bank last year. The food was good, the beer was even better, and honestly, I could have spent the whole night there drinking myself into oblivion, and according to the police report, I did. So imagine my disappointment when I returned earlier this year, only to find out that my favourite drinking establishment had mutated into a pretentious, overpriced hipster shithole, selling craft beer brewed in someone's bathtub, and vegan, gluten-free, ethically sourced bar snacks that made me want to kill myself and everyone involved in their production. The building and even the decor was the same as I remembered, but everything that made the place good had been stripped away, and there was only one cure for that sort of thing. No, I mean this. Anyway, the point of this totally contrived anecdote is to facilitate a rant about something else I used to enjoy, but which ultimately morphed into a disappointing pile of fecal matter served up by a pair of bearded hipster-looking assholes. Stranger Things was one of the most interesting shows to come out of 2016. A quirky but surprisingly effective mix of horror movie, sci-fi adventure and coming-of-age drama, all wrapped up in a big bow made of 80s nostalgia. It burst onto the Netflix scene a couple of years back and took the world by storm. People just couldn't get enough of Stranger Things. Shit man, even I got caught up in the hysteria. The series is centered around the small midwestern town of Raccoon City, Hawkins, Indiana, where shady government scientists in a nearby lab have been doing psychic experiments on a young girl named Eleven. But it all goes tits up and they accidentally open a gateway to an alternate dimension of darkness, death and decay known as the Upside Down. This allows a creature called the Demigorgon to cross through into our world and attack local townspeople. It's a shame this whole thing didn't happen in the East End of Glasgow, to be honest. The Demigorgon would have taken one look around and been like, nah, it'll be fine, I'll stick with the Upside Down, thanks. Anyway, one of the first people to disappear is a young boy named Will Byers, which causes his small group of friends to start searching for him. They end up joining forces with Eleven, while his mother gradually convinces the local sheriff that there's more going on than a simple child abduction. Eventually they rescue Will, Eleven sacrifices herself to kill the Demigorgon, and everyone else lives happily ever after. And the show ends right there, because it already told a satisfying story, and anything beyond this would just be a shameless cash grab. That's what I'd like to say. The reality is that when there's money to be made, people will spin out a viable creative concept pretty much as far as it can go. Season 2 basically rehashed the plot from the first season, minus the intrigue, mystery and tragic fairy tale atmosphere that made it so compelling in the first place, while adding a bunch of unnecessary additions to an already bloated cast, removing the fear factor of the Demigorgons, and giving Eleven one of the most pointless, time-wasting plot arcs I think I've ever seen in all my 6 hours of sobriety. So my enthusiasm for Season 3 wasn't exactly high when I sat down with my pint of gin last week to plough through it. 8 hours later, my glass was empty, my fears were pretty much confirmed, and there was a suspiciously damp patch where I'd been sitting on my couch. I think I might actually have pissed myself. The premise of Season 3 is basically the same shit we've seen twice already. The gateway to the Upside Down was closed, but now some assholes want to open it up again, allowing monstrous creatures to come through and invade our world, and only our plucky band of misfits can put a stop to it. This time around, our assholes of the week are the Russians. Because, why not, right? I'm sure there's some kind of viable military application for opening an unstable doorway to an alternate dimension filled with terrifying monsters of unknown power bent on destroying our world. What could possibly go wrong? This kind of logic reminds me of that asshole who wanted to use massively expensive, unpredictable, resource-hungry, and easily killed dinosaur clones to win the war in Afghanistan, or the company that thinks a genetically engineered virus with the potential to wipe out the entire human race is a more effective weapon than just dropping bombs. Fuck off, show. Anyway, the Russians have set up shop in a huge underground military base beneath the local shopping mall, because that's totally something you could do. I'm sure people wouldn't be curious about the massive amount of construction and excavation work going on there, or the huge influx of scientists and other personnel to the area, or the regular power blackouts and electromagnetic pulses fucking everything up. Speaking of which, Joyce notices that all the magnets have fallen off her fridge, and because her whole reason for being is to look like a crazy cat lady while obsessively pursuing a subject that nobody else cares about, she eventually ropes Sheriff Hopper into figuring out why, which causes them to uncover a Russian research outpost and run into this absolute tool. Meanwhile, Dustin intercepts a coded Russian radio signal, so he hooks up with Steve, who works in an ice cream parlour for some reason, and they discover there's a secret base right beneath their shopping mall. Wow, that was lucky! While all this insanity is going on, local people and animals across Hawkins start acting weird. They look like regular humans, but there's something disturbingly strange and unnatural about them. They all operate as a collective hive mind, making them incapable of independent thought. Sounds weirdly familiar. They've all been possessed by a creature from the Upside Down known as the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer wants to cross over into our dimension and take over the world, and it's up to the emaciated corpse of local news reporter Nancy to figure out what's happening. But none of the men at her newspaper want to help because patriarchy? So she enlists her serial killer looking boyfriend and off they go. Jesus, someone give this girl a cheese sandwich or something. It's actually painful to look at her. Anyway, the upshot here is that there are 3 parallel story threads woven throughout season 3. Dustin and Steve infiltrating the Russian base. 11 and the other kids versus the Mind Flayer. Hopper and Joyce versus the Russian Terminator. All 3 subplots eventually converge for a big showdown to expose the Russians, kill the Terminator, and stop the Mind Flayer from taking over the world. Now that's all well and good, but like the Star Wars prequels, the problem lies in the execution. There's a whole bunch of things this season gets very badly wrong, and to be honest, I could probably bore the arse off you by talking about them all day long. But for the sake of our collective sanity, I've boiled it down to the drinkers' top 5 reasons why season 3 sucks. Ready? Let's dive in. Number 1. So many characters. The cast of Stranger Things has become more bloated than Steven Seagal's horrific physical form this season. Season 1 featured a small, close-knit group of kids, unified behind the goal of finding their missing friend. They each had a unique role and personality. Dustin was the smart but geeky comic relief. Lucas was the skeptical one who constantly questioned everything. And Mike was the all-rounder, the reluctant leader who eventually formed a close bond with Eleven. The dynamic worked because each character had their own unique strengths and weaknesses. Their different personalities made for some great arguments and conversations, and they were all played by, generally, good actors that you couldn't help but warm to. Then season 2 introduced us to Max. She's a tomboy who likes to skateboard, and she acts like a total asshole towards the group, but for some reason they all accept her like she's some kind of ginger messiah destined to be one of them or something, despite the fact they have absolutely no shared interests and nothing in common. This is not how childhood friendships play out, Duffer Brothers. It gets even worse in season 3, when Max seems to spend most of her time driving a wedge between Mike and Eleven, and complaining about how boys are the worst thing to ever exist. Weirdly, she also wants to share a bed with Eleven at one point. What could they possibly be setting up here, I wonder? Another new addition is Robin, who works at the shopping mall with Steve. Now naturally, she's smarter and better than him at everything, and she can decode an encrypted Russian transmission using just a dictionary, because I'm sure they were that easy to figure out. Oh, and she's gay. If it seems like I just dropped that in there for no reason at all, then great, because that's basically what the show does too. Gotta tick that representation box somehow, I guess. I also love this scene where the Russians are interrogating them and they torture the shit out of Steve, but they won't lay a finger on Robin, even though she knows just as much as him and would likely be easier to break under torture. I guess ruthless undercover Russian military operatives have a sense of chivalry too then. But I left the worst for last, and in this case, the worst happens to be this insufferable little arsehole. Her name's Erica. and she is without a doubt the most annoying, cringe-worthy, bile-inducing character I've seen since Rose Tico taught me to protect the things I love. And she's played by an actress who tears the absolute arse out of every line of dialogue she's given, like she's in a middle school Christmas play or something. I mean, I know child actors can be a bit hit or miss, but honestly, are you telling me this talentless wannabe was the best you could find? Fuck off, show. The point I'm trying to make with all this pish is that the bigger the cast gets, the harder it becomes to find stuff for them to do. Either some characters become irrelevant and get pushed into the background, or you end up having to create more and more subplots for them, which results in a flabby and convoluted narrative that people quickly lose interest in. Either way, your screenplay's fucked. Here's a tip: if you find yourself having to think of things for your characters to do, instead of their roles being obvious, then you've probably got too many characters to work with. Number 2, Stranger Things isn't supposed to be a comedy. I don't know why, but at some point between seasons 2 and 3, this show turns into a goofy slapstick comedy. I mean, season 1 did have moments of levity during tense scenes, but generally the show took itself pretty seriously. Beneath all the 80s in-jokes and alternate dimension stuff, it was a show that dealt with some pretty heavy dramatic issues, such as child abduction, illegal experimentation, loss, grief and acceptance, bullying, betrayal and redemption, trust, friendship and loyalty, and personal sacrifice. The dramatic undertone was helped by the fact that they had some pretty competent actors to do most of the heavy lifting, and you couldn't help but empathise with their struggles. It even subverted my expectations once in a while, like having the asshole teenage bully turn out to be a decent guy, who gradually wakes up and redeems himself. But season 3 plays out like a fucking SNL skit most of the time, with wacky slapstick encounters and ludicrous situations that actually made me question whether the same people were still writing it. For example, teenagers in sailor outfits infiltrating a secret Russian base. Russian scientist likes Slurpees. Magnum PI shirt is funny. The most gullible security guards in history. A fat man trying to escape down a kiddie slide. Nancy's co-workers being total assholes 100% of the time. Drugged characters acting like drunken idiots. Dustin has to sing an 80s power ballad to get a secret code from his girlfriend. Enough! The point is, the emotional tone of this season is all over the place. One minute we're supposed to feel unnerved as a character's mind slowly unravels under the Mind Flayer's influence. The next we're meant to be laughing as Steve and Robin try to negotiate with a 10-year-old girl. And then we're supposed to be excited as Hopper gets his ass kicked by the Russian Terminator. You can have serious drama and action and humour in your show, but ultimately one of them has to be the main focus. And it honestly feels like the writers prioritised comedy over drama this time around. Fuck off, show. Number 3, The Russian Connection. I've seen enough 80s action movies to know that the Russians were the default bad guys most of the time, because communism's evil. But honestly, the whole setup this season just left me scratching my head. So they plan to reopen the gateway to the Upside Down using a giant laser drill thing. How? I thought it was Eleven's psychic powers that did this kind of thing. What the fuck is this thing supposed to be? And how did they construct and operate a massive underground complex like this without anyone knowing about it? I mean, I know they had the local mayor in their pocket, but are you seriously telling me that nobody outside of Hawkins had any idea this was going on? Is this town that isolated? Like nobody from the US government was keeping an eye on the place, considering there used to be a top secret research lab right next door? And what are the Russians even hoping to achieve with all this? It would be like unleashing Cthulhu to overthrow the regime in North Korea. How did they even find out about the gateway in the first place? Never mind learning enough about it to reopen the thing. Fuck, who cares? The writers clearly don't. The point here is that the evil scientists from the first season were worthy secondary antagonists because they had the authority of the US government behind them. They were willing to experiment on children, sacrifice their own people, and murder innocent civilians to further their aims. They were bad people doing bad things behind the mask of respectability and authority. The Russians here are like dumb cartoon villains in comparison. Totally inept, laughably gullible, and monumentally stupid. The fact that one of their scientists is willing to defect to America because he likes slushies and Burger King is one of the dumbest things I've seen since the last time Brie Larson opened her mouth. Number 4, the Mind Flayer isn't scary. remember the Demogorgon from the first season? That was a genuinely unsettling antagonist because it was thoroughly alien, both in nature, behaviour and in appearance. You didn't really understand what it wanted or why it was here. It was immensely tough and strong and pretty much unstoppable. You could hit it with baseball bats, shoot it with bullets, even set it on fire and it would just keep coming. Like the best monsters in cinema, it effectively tapped into our primal fear of the unknown. You didn't understand it, so you couldn't begin to grapple with it. And there was the even more unnerving possibility that this thing was just the tip of the iceberg, that there were even more dangerous and monstrous creatures lurking in the darkness of the Upside Down. But by season 3, we know exactly what's lurking in the darkness. The Mind Flayer, the intelligence behind everything in the Upside Down. It wants to come through the gateway and destroy our world because, why not? All we saw of it before was this towering, shadowy creature that made of smoke or something, but when we finally see it for real in season 3, it just looks like someone threw up over a modern art sculpture. And believe me, I could tell you plenty of stories about that. It stops being scary because it's no longer an alien entity with unknown powers and abilities. Now it's just a big hulking monster that breaks through walls, and it feels cheap. Yeah, Billy becomes its human avatar for a while, and he has some decent scenes fighting Eleven, but he ultimately plays second fiddle to a big old chunk of overblown CGI. What a waste. Number 5, 11. Yeah, I realise that was probably a confusing subheading now, but what the fuck, I've started so I'll finish. 11 was one of the most interesting characters of the first season, a little girl who could barely speak and seemingly had no concept of the world outside her lab. She was small and frightened and lost, but beneath it all, she had an immense power that she was just starting to understand. Seeing her gradually form a childish bond of trust and friendship with Mike and the others was heartwarming, and her final sacrifice to kill the Demogorgon at the end of the season was genuinely poignant and gripping. The idea that she was willing to give up her young life to protect a group of people she barely knew from a monster she'd helped to unleash. It was a perfect, bittersweet culmination of her character arc. And like I said before, it played well into the fantasy, dark fairy tale aspect of the story. If the writers had actually left her dead, then I would have considered that a brave and very mature dramatic choice. But nah, why worry about dramatic integrity when there's money to be made? 11 was a popular character, so they brought her right back to life in season 2 through the most contrived bullshit explanation possible. Now it's a few years later and she's basically a normal teenager. She goes to school, she talks like everyone else, she goes to shopping malls and she has a boyfriend. Everything that made her so unique and interesting and sympathetic is kinda gone now. Well, except for the psychic powers she can still use. And wow, does she use them? I mean, all the time, for pretty much everything. Whether it's closing doors, throwing people across rooms, spying on her ex-boyfriend, or tearing giant monsters in half. It seems like there's no limit to what she can do, or how often she can do it. I mean, is there a resource cost to any of this? Does it hurt? Does it need to recharge? I thought the constant nosebleeds were meant to show that her powers were actually causing physical damage to her, and using them too often could possibly kill her. But now it's like she doesn't give a shit. She can do it as often as she likes, for any reason. And this creates a problem that I like to call the Captain Marvel paradox. If you have a character who can do basically anything and overcome any problem with no limitations, then what's the point in anyone else even being there? Also, I know that Millie Bobby Brown can cry on command, and that's impressive, but it kinda loses its impact once you've seen it for the 10th time. It reminds me of Lara Croft in the new Tomb Raider games, gunning down enemies by the dozen while simultaneously apologising and crying about it. Fuck off, show. So there you have it, my top 5 reasons why Stranger Things is a bit shit now. It's certainly not the most comprehensive list I could come up with, but it covers my main gripes pretty well. In my experience, shows like this usually go downhill when the writers either run out of ideas or lose sight of what actually made their show good in the first place. But in this case, the Duffer Brothers have somehow managed to do both at the same time. Well, it's impressive if nothing else. I just hope they have the good sense to either get Stranger Things back on track, or the courage to end it before it becomes a total embarrassment, like another show I could mention. And that's all I have to complain about today. Go away now!